He was invisible. In the summer of 1944, a 19-year-old radio operator hunched over a battered transmitter in a jungle clearing on a nameless Pacific island. He wasn't a soldier anyone would notice. Thin, quiet, hands stained with grease and ink. The infantry called him Sparky. The officers barely remembered his name. He was the last man anyone expected to change the course of a battle. But the enemy was closing in. 300 Japanese troops, bayonets fixed, convinced they had the Allies trapped. The outpost's fate seemed sealed, but the Japanese had made a fatal mistake. They saw a boy with headphones. They didn't see the mind that had spent years tinkering with broken radios in a dusty garage, the son of a railroad telegrapher who could tap out Morse faster than most men could speak. They didn't see the calm that came from growing up in a world where every message could mean life or death. In the next 20 minutes, this invisible operator would turn static into a weapon, sending a secret code that would shatter the enemy's confidence and save his entire unit from annihilation. The story doesn't begin with the enemy at the wire. It begins in the quiet corners of a small-town workshop, where a boy learned to listen for signals no one else could hear. And as the jungle closed in and the airwaves crackled with danger, rumors began to spread. Whispers of a radio man who could make the impossible happen, and whose messages seemed to turn the tide when all hope was lost. Whispers traveled faster than bullets through the Allied ranks. Some said the radio operator could hear enemy footsteps through the static. Others claimed he once called in an airstrike with nothing but a pencil and a broken antenna. No one seemed to know his real name, just that when the situation turned desperate, he was the one the officers called for. In the mess tent, men swapped stories about the ghost on the wire, a figure who always seemed to be in the right place at the right time, his calm voice cutting through chaos like a lifeline. Even the Japanese began to notice. Intercepted transmissions revealed a growing unease among their officers. They spoke of a phantom operator, a master of deception who could twist the airwaves to his will. Patrols sent to locate the Allied radio post returned empty-handed, shaken by false signals and phantom orders. The jungle itself seemed to conspire with the enemy, hiding the source of the mysterious broadcasts. Yet for all the rumors, the truth remained elusive. The radio operator kept to himself, slipping in and out of the shadows, his face rarely seen and his name almost never spoken aloud. He was a presence more than a person, a rumor, a code, a last hope when the perimeter was about to break. As the Japanese closed in and the tension mounted, one question echoed through every foxhole and command tent. Who was the man behind the static, and how much longer could he keep the enemy guessing? The Pacific Island campaign was a war of attrition, fought in some of the harshest conditions on Earth. Dense jungles, sweltering heat, and relentless rain turned every advance into a test of endurance. For the Allies, each island was a stepping stone toward Japan, but every mile was paid for in blood. The Japanese defenders were dug in, determined to fight to the last man, and their numbers often dwarfed the small Allied units sent to seize remote outposts. Supplies were scarce, reinforcements uncertain, and the enemy seemed to appear from the shadows without warning. In this unforgiving environment, communication was more than a convenience. It was a lifeline. Radios became the nervous system of the battlefield, connecting scattered squads, calling in artillery, and coordinating air support. A single missed message could mean disaster, while a well-timed transmission could turn the tide of a battle. The Japanese knew this, and they made Allied radio operators prime targets, launching raids to destroy equipment and intercepting signals in hopes of sowing confusion. The result was a constant game of cat and mouse, with both sides racing to outsmart each other on the airwaves. The odds were rarely in the Allies' favor. Outnumbered and outgunned, they relied on ingenuity and grit to survive. The Japanese, with their superior numbers and intimate knowledge of the terrain, seemed unstoppable. Yet time and again, small Allied units managed to hold out against overwhelming assaults, thanks in no small part to the men behind the radios. These operators, often overlooked and underestimated, became the quiet heroes of the campaign. Their ability to adapt, improvise, and deceive the enemy was as crucial as any weapon. In the shadow of giants, it was the quick thinking of a few that kept hope alive, and sometimes it was a single secret code that made all the difference. Long before the war, before the jungle and the static, the radio operator was just a boy named Charlie from a small railroad town in Nebraska. His world was a patchwork of wheat fields, train whistles, and the hum of electricity in his father's workshop. Charlie's father was a telegrapher, a man who could tap out messages faster than most people could talk, and he taught his son the language of dots and dashes before he could even read. Evenings were spent hunched over a battered workbench, fixing broken radios for neighbors or stringing up makeshift antennas in the backyard, chasing distant voices across the static. Charlie's knack for electronics was matched only by his curiosity. He once rewired the family's old Victrola to pick up shortwave broadcasts, filling the kitchen with news from London and Sydney. When a neighbor's tractor broke down, it was Charlie who figured out how to patch the ignition with a coil of copper wire and a bit of chewing gum. He was the kid everyone called when something stopped working, and he never turned down a challenge. But beneath the tinkerer's hands was a heart shaped by hardship. The Depression had hit his family hard, and Charlie learned early that you fixed what you had or went without. When war came, Charlie enlisted not for glory but out of a sense of duty, and a quiet hope that his skills might make a difference. He was never the loudest in the barracks, but when the radios failed or the lines went dead, it was Charlie who stayed up all night, coaxing life back into the battered equipment. His calm under pressure became legendary among his unit. One sergeant joked that Charlie could find a signal in a thunderstorm and a solution in a pile of junk. For Charlie, every message sent was a promise kept. Every code cracked a small victory against the darkness. And as the enemy closed in, it was this quiet resolve and the lessons of a railroad town that would become his greatest weapon. Charlie's secret weapon wasn't a new piece of technology or a classified cipher. It was a simple idea born from years of listening to the world through static. As the Japanese closed in, he realized that brute force wouldn't save his outnumbered unit. Instead, he turned to deception. Drawing on his childhood lessons in Morse code and his father's stories of railroad telegraphers sending hidden messages, Charlie devised a plan. He would use a secret code, a series of seemingly routine transmissions laced with subtle, prearranged signals only his own side would recognize. With the enemy intercepting every broadcast, Charlie began sending out false reports, requests for artillery support, urgent calls for reinforcements, and coded references to phantom Allied units moving into position. Each message was carefully crafted to sound authentic, but hidden within the rhythm and phrasing were cues that told his own men to hold their fire and stay hidden. To the Japanese, it sounded like the Allies were preparing a massive counterattack. Patrols reported hearing movement in the jungle, and the enemy's officers, already on edge, hesitated to advance. The brilliance of Charlie's trick was its simplicity. He didn't need encryption machines or elaborate codes, just a deep understanding of how people listened, and how fear could be amplified by uncertainty. The Japanese, convinced they were walking into an ambush, slowed their assault and began to pull back, buying precious time for the Allied unit to regroup and prepare a real defense. In just 20 minutes, Charlie's secret code had turned the tables, transforming a hopeless standoff into a narrow escape. It was a victory won not with bullets but with the power of suggestion and the quiet genius of a boy from Nebraska. Confusion spread quickly through the Japanese ranks as the minutes ticked by. Intercepted Allied transmissions, once a source of valuable intelligence, now seemed to contradict what their scouts reported on the ground. Officers pored over radio logs, trying to make sense of the sudden flurry of coded messages and references to Allied reinforcements. Some believed they were on the verge of being surrounded, while others suspected a trap was being set just beyond the tree line. The jungle, already thick with tension, now felt haunted by invisible enemies. Rumors began to ripple through the platoons. Soldiers whispered about hearing the clatter of tanks in the night, or the distant shouts of American troops moving into position. Patrols sent to probe the Allied perimeter returned with nothing but stories of shadows and silence. The sense of certainty that had driven the Japanese advance was replaced by doubt and hesitation. Even the most seasoned officers found themselves second-guessing every order, wary of walking into an ambush orchestrated by a faceless enemy on the radio. Official reports grew increasingly frantic. Commanders demanded explanations for the stalled attack, but no one could provide a clear answer. The psychological toll was unmistakable. What had begun as a confident assault had devolved into a waiting game with every man on edge, listening for threats that might not even exist. In those tense moments, the Japanese troops realized They were not just fighting soldiers in the jungle, but a mind that could twist the battlefield with nothing more than a few well-placed words. The Japanese command, sensing that something was amiss, refused to let confusion dictate the outcome. Determined to regain the initiative, they ordered their best signal officers to intercept and analyze every Allied transmission. Teams huddled over radios, scribbling down Morse code, searching for patterns or weaknesses in the messages. They tried to jam the frequencies, flooding the airwaves with static and false signals of their own, hoping to drown out the Allied operator's voice. But Charlie was ready. He shifted frequencies with practiced ease, weaving his transmissions through the noise, always staying one step ahead. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Japanese officers decided to intensify the assault. They ordered probing attacks along the perimeter, sending small squads to test for weaknesses and force the Allies to reveal their true numbers. The jungle erupted with sporadic gunfire and shouted commands, but each time the Japanese advanced, they found only empty foxholes and carefully laid traps. Charlie, monitoring the chaos from his post, relayed real-time updates to his unit, guiding them to shift positions and avoid direct confrontation. His calm, steady voice on the radio became the thread that held the defense together. As the minutes dragged on, the Japanese grew more aggressive, launching a full-scale push in hopes of overwhelming the defenders by sheer force. Yet every move they made seemed anticipated, every tactic countered by a new twist in the Allied response. Charlie's adaptability was relentless. He mimicked the enemy's own codes, sent out decoy transmissions, and even fed misinformation to captured scouts. The harder the Japanese pressed, the more elusive their target became. The contrast was stark. The Japanese relied on brute strength, numbers, and rigid tactics, convinced that overwhelming firepower would break the Allied line. Charlie relied on improvisation, quick thinking, and the subtle art of deception. In the end, it was not the loudest guns but the quietest signals that shaped the battle's outcome, leaving the enemy exhausted, uncertain, and no closer to victory than when the assault began. The jungle erupted in chaos as the Japanese launched their final desperate assault. Mortar shells thudded into the earth, sending plumes of mud and leaves skyward. Machine gun fire rattled through the trees, and the air was thick with the shouts of advancing troops. Inside the Allied perimeter, Charlie's hands moved with practiced speed over the radio, sweat stinging his eyes as he relayed last-minute instructions. The defenders, battered and exhausted, clung to their positions, trusting the voice in their ears to guide them through the storm. Suddenly, the Japanese attack faltered. Patrols reported seeing movement in the undergrowth, shadows that vanished before they could be engaged, the echo of distant voices suggesting Allied reinforcements were closing in. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks. Officers barked conflicting orders, some urging a retreat, others demanding a renewed push. Charlie seized the moment, transmitting a final coded message that signaled his unit to break contact and slip away under the cover of the barrage. As the Japanese pressed forward, they found the Allied positions abandoned, foxholes empty, radios silent, and a trail of false clues leading deeper into the jungle. The realization hit like a cold wave. They had been chasing ghosts, outmaneuvered by a handful of men and a radio operator who had turned the battlefield into a maze of deception. Frustration boiled over as commanders demanded answers, but there was nothing left to fight but shadows and static. For Charlie and his unit, the escape was narrow but complete. Hearts pounded as they melted into the jungle, every man knowing how close they had come to disaster. The relief was overwhelming, but so was the awe. One quiet operator, armed with nothing but a battered transmitter and a mind for mischief, had fooled an entire enemy force. As the sun set over the tangled canopy, the legend of the secret code was born, a story that would echo through the ranks long after the guns fell silent. In the hours after the escape, the Allied unit regrouped at a hidden rendezvous point deep in the jungle. Exhausted but alive, the men traded wide-eyed glances and nervous laughter, scarcely believing they had slipped through the jaws of certain defeat. Word of Charlie's deception spread quickly, first among his own squad and then up the chain of command. Officers who had once overlooked the quiet radio man now sought him out, eager to learn how a handful of coded messages had turned the tide against overwhelming odds. The effect on morale was electric. For soldiers battered by months of attrition and uncertainty, Charlie's victory became a beacon of hope. His story was retold around campfires and in briefing tents, a reminder that ingenuity and nerve could outmatch brute force. Other radio operators began to experiment with similar tactics, weaving deception into their transmissions and keeping the enemy guessing at every turn. The Japanese, meanwhile, grew increasingly wary of Allied communications, their confidence shaken by the memory of a single night when nothing was as it seemed. Charlie's legend grew with each retelling. He became a symbol of the quiet, unsung heroes who shaped the war from behind the lines. His secret code was studied, adapted, and passed on, influencing Allied operations across the Pacific. In a campaign defined by hardship and sacrifice, the story of the radio operator who fooled 300 Japanese troops in just 20 minutes became proof that sometimes the sharpest weapon on the battlefield was a clever mind and the courage to use it. After the war, Charlie returned to Nebraska, trading the chaos of the jungle for the quiet rhythm of small-town life. He never sought recognition for what he'd done, brushing off questions about the secret code with a shy smile and a shrug. To neighbors, he was just the man who could fix any radio, always willing to lend a hand or share a story over a cup of coffee. Yet those who served with him never forgot the night he turned the tide with nothing but quick thinking and a steady hand. Charlie's story became a quiet legend, a reminder that heroism isn't always loud or celebrated. Sometimes it's found in the calm voice on the radio, the steady hands in a crisis, or the mind that sees possibility where others see only danger. His legacy lived on in every operator who learned to trust their instincts, every soldier who believed that one person's courage could change the course of a battle. In a world that often measures strength by force, Charlie proved that ingenuity and resolve can be just as powerful. His life was a testament to the idea that even in the darkest moments, a single act of cleverness and bravery can echo far beyond the battlefield, reminding us all that history is shaped not just by armies, but by individuals who dare to think differently. If Charlie's story inspired you, share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in his place? Facing impossible odds with only your wits and a radio? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of courage, ingenuity, and the hidden heroes of history. Join our global community of history lovers, where your voice helps keep these remarkable tales alive. There are countless legends still waiting to be discovered. Make sure you're here for the next one.